everyone, I'm Arlene Dickinson. Thanks for joining me on my podcast. I have been a longtime partner of TELUS because I value the support they provide to both local businesses and entrepreneurs. Recently, TELUS launched Stand With Owners. It's an initiative that's targeted to support Canadian small businesses during COVID-19 because now more than ever, we could all use a bit of help. And that's why TELUS and I have partnered to provide all of my listeners with an exclusive limited time offer. Right now, if you bring your business to TELUS, you can receive 20% off a mobility plan for business, and you also get the first 3 months free. That's right, free. Visit TELUS.com/reinvention to redeem this offer. Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Reinvention. Today I speak with famous restaurateur Mark McEwan. Now during COVID, I have thought often that I'm really glad that I don't own a restaurant. But that's simply because I haven't been thinking about it right at all. Mark taught me exactly what it means to reinvent yourself in one of the most competitive industries that are out there. He's done it well, he's been really smart about it, and he's got a lot of experience to draw on that'll help teach all of us how to reinvent ourselves in the future. Mark, where are we talking to you from? You're in Toronto today?
I'm at the cottage in Thornbury.
In Thornbury.
I'm in the city 3 days a week, checking on my businesses that are still open. And then I'm cocooning up here and connecting with everybody and sort of running the show from here. And getting ready to reopen the city. That's the big question.
It is a question. I mean, Mark, we have something in common. We both have cottages in residences up in a little community just north of Toronto where... Yeah, and such a beautiful part of our country up there. And I have to tell you, when I knew you were, a neighbor up there and you were there, I was really excited about that thought I was sharing a community with, Mark McEwan. I felt pretty special at that point, I got to tell you. And then, and then when you opened, well, it's true. And then you opened a restaurant up there, which made me even more excited because it's just a little tiny town for our listeners. It's a small little place. I don't know, would it be a couple thousand people?
I think somewhere about there. But I think Thornbury is the greatest little town in Ontario. I happened upon it 20 years ago, and certainly was nothing as it is today, but it has just grown into this amazing community of people. From all walks of life, lots of expats from the city, and it's just such an interesting place. You never know who you're walking and meeting and talking to. And we did a Fabrica restaurant right in the heart on Bruce Street, and we just had such an amazing reception to it. It's been a lot of fun. So we're going on our second year. It'll be 2 years in August that we've been open, and just looking to get it reopened.
Well, I have been a frequent patron there, and I love the food there. And more importantly, I love the vibe of the whole place. I mean, it's just, as you said, it's just such a wonderful small little town. And there's so much good about these communities, which are really being impacted right now. I mean, it's very different. But just for, you are like, as I said, you're a restaurateur, you're a celebrity chef. You've had, I think, 3 television shows.
I was thinking about that the other day. I've been on television in one form or another for about 15 years.
Yeah, you and me. We share that in common too, about the same time.
Yeah, it's funny how much time goes by and how quickly it goes by. And yet sometimes you just have to sit back and remember exactly where you started with it and the progression of the years. And I think my first TV show started when I built Bymark.
Oh, really?
In the Dallas Core, and that was 2002. So it goes back a long, long way.
You know, what's interesting about being on TV for such a long period of time is that people do see you go through your own changes, like physically, spiritually, mentally, everything. They kind of watch the permeations of your life. And then you look back at shows and you think, why did I think that looked good? Or why would I say that? I don't know if you ever do that, but sometimes I just go, I don't want to watch this.
I've had a few moments where I've questioned my hairstylist when I've looked back at some of the shows.
But it was good at the time, right? It was good at the time.
Well, apparently it was, and I was feeling very confident about it at the time. So it's funny how you do progress, though. Yeah.
So
Wrinkles and all.
it's true, and I'm fine to have my wrinkles. I don't care about that anymore. I've really just come to kind of love just kind of the skin I'm in. But we share. So we have a place in the same town. We are within a year of each other in terms of our age, and we both have been on television. So we have a lot of things in common. But what we have zero in common is our ability to, like your culinary expertise and mine would not be even in the same planet, let alone in the same town. But what's that?
We all make our living in a different way, right?
That's true. That's true. But I didn't know you were born in Buffalo. You're an American originally.
I'm an American from a Canadian family that on a business trip, and they stayed for 23 years in Buffalo. My father was in the television business. He was executive producer at Channel 4 for many, many, many years. So they moved back to Canada. It was my first trip back to Canada to live in 1975. So just as I finished high school, I came to Canada, finished up a year of school, and I went right into my culinary training after that.
And your first restaurant job was you were a dishwasher in Buffalo at Mindy's Wine Cellar, and you made a whole $1.60 an hour. How old were you?
Yeah, that would have been 74. 15, 16 years old. It was just a job for a young kid needed to put gas in his car and put some money in his pocket, and that was the only job that was available. That's when you looked at the newspaper for all the job postings, right? So I was always very energetic that way to work. I always worked as a young man, whether I did my own thing, cutting lawns and shoveling driveways, or working for someone else. I caddied in golf. I taught myself how to be a caddy. After watching the U.S. Open with my dad one day, I said, I can do that. I went to the country club and I timed my way in, and they actually trained me to be a caddy at the Buffalo Country Club. So, you can do almost anything when you put your mind to it. But my first encounter with a restaurant behind the scenes was Mindy's Wine Cellar, and it was very exciting, a very exciting restaurant in the city at that time, and it was just the coolest environment. So as a young person, my first impression was a very positive one. Not that I ever thought I would stay in the business at that point in time, but I landed up staying in the business and cooking again when I went to Toronto. I worked at the Country Squire restaurant on the QEW while I was going to school. Furthered my cooking skills a little bit. And then I just decided I was going to take a year off and not go to university. I was going to go to hotel school.
Yeah.
And I would cook and just take on an apprenticeship and see if I liked it just for shits and giggles. And you know what? It just worked out perfectly for me. Once I was actually in an established hotel and I saw the dynamic nature of the kitchen, and that it was really the heart and soul of the hotel. For me, it had a huge attraction, and I never looked back, and I never questioned it at that point. So I just stayed head first into the career.
So you didn't start out to become a chef. Like cooking, being a chef wasn't was it your ambition when you were 15 or 16 years old, or was it just something that because that you had good work ethic and you found yourself attracted to it, that you just started to find passion for it? Because people always talk about passion and purpose in life. How did you realize that this was it for you at that age, especially?
Well, I don't think you do. I think it's very random. The thing that cooking offered to me was I'm very good with my hands. I'm an exceptionally good worker, hard worker, and I can handle pressure. So that dynamic in the kitchen, and then working visually, the tactile nature of working with food, working with your hands, presenting food, the beauty of it, managing the service, managing the pressure, those were all things I was very good at. So I excelled at it. And I learned to excel at it at a very, God, how old did I be? Like 19, 20 years old. I was doing that. And I was within management by the time I was 22, 23.
Wow.
So it just felt like a very natural place to be. And I loved it. And I was good at it. I was very, very good at it. And, sort of the artistic side of food, the mechanics of food, handling of food, presentation of food, and then most importantly is being able to manage the business side of it, being able to manage service, that the restaurant goes seamlessly and feels good. And appropriate timing. There's a lot involved to be a chef. And I always found that to be really the most interesting part of the business.
Yeah, there's as much business to being a chef, a restaurateur, as there is to being creative as a chef itself, right? Like
and more today,
right,
today,
right,
than ever before. You know, the likelihood of a restaurant surviving today and being prosperous is much harder than it used to be. Mainly because there are just so many restaurants. It has become such a fashion-forward business that everybody wants to own one. And when you look at real estate across the city, you know, standard real estate and businesses on the city street, the complexion of it has really changed over the years. You know, you don't see the neighborhood hardware store anymore, the beauty parlor, the barber shop, the corner store. These types of businesses don't really occupy that many spaces anymore. But it's one restaurant after another food service operation, after a sandwich shop, after a submarine place, then it's a pizza spot. And you walk down any city street and it's predominantly food now, where it never used to be that way.
Well, I mean, do you think that's going to, you know, just thinking about reinvention though, when you think about what you just said, because as you were saying those words, I was mentally kind of walking down a street in my mind thinking, you know, he's right. Like every time I go out, there's so many restaurants and there's so many different ethnicities to the restaurants and the flavor profiles and, you know, the fusion type restaurants that mix all these different types of flavors. But let's talk about today. I mean, today when we're in this, you know, we're coming out where there's so many restaurants that have got to be just wondering what the hell, because, you know, can they reopen? Will they reopen? You know, how many patrons can they have? And they're like, what's going through your head right now as you think about the restaurant space in general?
Well, it's quite surreal to be in this situation. You know, you can't even make this stuff up. It's like we're living a B movie.
Yeah.
So, and we have to let it run its course. And you listen to the politicians every day and they're saying, let's not be too anxious to reopen. Let's be careful. In my mind, I'm thinking, how do you shut an entire economy down and then think you're just going to turn it back on? You may not have an economy left, or you may have one that is severely compromised going forward. And I just don't think there's been enough thought put into that. And I'm not sure shutting everything down was necessarily the right thing to do. I'm not saying it was wrong, but I'm 6 months down the road from now, when you look in the rearview mirror and we know a little bit more, will we have made the right decision? That's going to be an interesting point in time when we have enough information to assess that. But getting started again is the big thing. So I'm looking at all my operations. I have 7 that are shuttered. And wow. We have to start, and we have to have an expectation of maybe 50% of the volume we had previously. So that means you're going to employ many fewer people. Mm-hmm. You're going to have to look at different ways of accessing revenue, whether it be takeout, whether it be home delivery, whatever it is. You're going to have to morph your business in certain ways to survive, I think. And I think even having said that, I think there's going to be a huge level of failure on the restart. And it's only because the dynamic is just so outrageously challenging.
Yeah, I think it's sad because a lot of people I've spoken to who have their favorite restaurants, their favorite, you know, they know the chefs, they know the people that work there, and they've seen them shuttered, as you just said, and they are there. There's a lot of grief around the fact that they don't know if they're going to reopen, and if they do, you know, will they be the same? And so I think there is, because it's a community, right? I mean, when you go out to eat, I mean, you really are. It's like going into somebody's home. If the chef and the restaurateur have done a good job of creating that environment where you feel like you're, you know, it's warm, it's welcoming, the food is good, you have it's a social experience. I
right.
think people are grieving that right now.
Yeah, it's a very delicate dance, and I think people are craving it, and I do believe they're going to want to go back to it as quickly as they can. So. I think the trick will be from the operational side is to really give them the confidence that you're covering the bases with sanitation, with spacing, with, you know, right down to we're talking about printing our menus. That means we have to glaze our menus so that we can wipe them down in between uses. or we have to throw them away and have disposable menus because people are not going to want to be handling it and then rehandling it. All the tables have to be sanitized in between uses. You have to space people out. You have to make sure that staff is well, that no one can even have the slightest cold and work.
Yeah.
So all those things have to be managed from the restaurant side to give the client confidence. And I think so. We're very good at that. So we're going to make sure that that's a very forward feel to the restaurant, not in an awkward way, but that it's visible and just get going. Thankfully patio season's coming and people want to be outside, and that's even a better place for them to be, is just outside in fresh air.
Yeah.
But we're waiting for signals from the mayor and from the premier.
Yeah, I hope you're right. So Mark, I mean, the restaurant industry it's always evolved though, right? It's always evolved. It's always it's a tough business to be in to begin with. I mean, you opened your first restaurant, which was North 44, which was like an incredibly famous, really renowned restaurant in Canada. And you did that in 1990 and you sold your car and and I just want to talk to you for a minute because I want to know if your wife has forgiven you, because you also sold your then fiance, your now wife, her ring to help finance the opening of your restaurant. Has she forgiven you for that?
Well, that wasn't for North 44. That was for Toronto. When I bought Toronto from Franco Prevedello in 1985, we weren't married yet. We were going to get married. We had money saved up, and I had a fancy little RX-7, and ended up selling that and taking all our money and buying a 1/3 interest in this restaurant. And the rest is kind of history because she took it on the chin beautifully. She didn't cry about it.
Yeah.
And we're still together. We're still together today, and we've been through lots of different businesses. That's for sure. So.
Did you buy her another ring?
Well, yes, many.
Many?
Yeah.
Many rings.
Yeah, I made up some ground there for sure.
Yeah.
But no, she's always been a very, very supportive business wife. Absolutely. And we always click that way, which is a great thing, because that's many times in the restaurant business, because of hours and always working weekends and what have you, can put a lot of pressure on families. But that was never an instance or an issue for us. So for that, I'm always grateful.
Yeah, no kidding. I mean, people underestimate the power of having a partner who, even whether they work in the home or out of the home, whether it's a man or a woman, it doesn't actually matter at all. What matters is whether, you can play your own roles and support each other in a way that helps each other to be successful. And that's a rare find. You've been together for a long time now, so clearly it's working.
Yeah, 36 years.
Wow.
Married, long time. But it's funny, who you marry is probably the most important decision you make in your life, because you'll end up having children, or maybe you don't, but if you do, that doesn't ever change, and you always have that relationship. It's not something that you should take lightly, and compatibility is really important. You have to be very careful on personality, on priorities, on all those basics, but it's such an important decision as to who you finally settle with, right?
Gee, where were you when I was getting married the first time? the second
well,
time.
Indeed. It's, you shouldn't have to battle through things all the time. It shouldn't be that hard, in my opinion. No, it's funny. You go back, you kind of walk down memory lane in 1990 when we built North 44. If you remember, the world went into a lot of chaos at that time.
Yeah.
So we experienced pretty deep recession right after we opened. So the first couple of years were very challenging. And we started doing a wholesale business out the back door to compensate for lack of traffic through the front door. So we started selling our smoked salmon. I started baking sourdough bread, and we were selling it to Pusateri's and the Five Thieves and all around the city. So I used to dash around the city in the morning and deliver bread, warm bread in my car to all these different locations. So now I'm a competitor to Pusateri's, but I used to be a supplier to Pusateri's. And that's how that business started. And then we started into catering. And so the back door became as busy as the front door. And out of one location, we had a really viable business. So we've just sort of expanded on that, and I guess that's where the attraction of going into retail came for me, because I always loved retail food stores. I just thought they were one of the most interesting places to visit when you're on vacation, or any place you are in the world. The food stores for me were always a point of focus. So that's when the Don Mills store came about, and now we have one at Young and Bloor, and we have one in TD Center. And our catering business has grown and grown and grown. It's amazing how big a portion of the business it is now. And now we've gotten into sort of industrial food manufacturing, where we're producing meals that we're partnering with a company out of Montreal called Good Food, and they do the deliverable boxes. Mm-hmm. But we do the prepared meal portion of that box. So if you're buying a truffle lasagna or ricotta gnocchi and some Marzano tomato sauce, or any other one of our vegetarian entrees, that is produced in our operation. And so we're trying to diversify how we generate revenue producing food, and who we sell it to and how we sell it. Not that we're just slotted into one category. And thankfully for me, that I have two very viable food stores going through this shutting down of the city. Otherwise, I would have absolutely zero revenue, or I would have a little bit of takeout revenue, which I don't know how you survive on that.
But that's pretty interesting, Mark, because you talk about the fact that you had all these restaurants, you were known for that. I mean, you had your television shows as well, but everything was focused on, being in that sector of the food business. And then you went into this retail grocery business, you called it McEwan's, right? McEwan.
Right.
And that's got to be, like, when you think about reinventing yourself, I mean, those are very different businesses. It's very different to launch and run a grocery store than it is to run a restaurant, right? So how, it sounds like it was a really fantastic end result, because it's kept you, as you said, now you've got revenue coming in from it. But you must have had to reinvent yourself through that, like change how you thought about business.
Well, it definitely operates with a different P&L. There's no question about it, and you have to understand that. But we came at it from a prepared food standpoint. So I approached it from a chef's perspective, and over the 10 years that I've had the Don Mills store, it has evolved tremendously. But is it an easy game? No, it's not an easy game, and it took us quite a while to figure it out, that's for sure. If I started over again, would I do it differently than my first store? Sure, I would. When you look at life in the rearview mirror, it always seems easy and clear to you.
Yeah.
But I think we have a very good formula now in retail, and we have a very unique offer, and a very high level of service in the store. We also do home delivery. So we do corporate catering delivery. We do all, again, out of the back door of our retail store. We're doing exactly the same thing as we did out of the back door of our restaurants. So that's how we sort of layered the company and grown the company. And it's just, we're always moving. We're always looking for new angles to keep people interested. And that's the world we live in today. Like people have a short attention span. They like to be taken care of, but they like to see change. They like to see evolution. And then you have to build efficiencies in as well into your business and try to manage all of that. So it's the food business is in one way it's great because everybody eats 3 times a day basically, but it does have its challenges. But I look at all industries today. I think business in general is challenging. It's highly competitive, and it's always changing. And that's the one good thing about the food industry. It changes at a slower rate than a lot of the other industries. When I look at high tech, wow, you can be in and then you can be out in a matter of 24 months.
You can be rich or you can be broke very quickly in that, yeah.
Yes, and so I think the retail clothing business is very challenging. There's many businesses that are tough out there. So I like the fact that we relate to people through food. There's a comforting level to that, and it sort of brings everybody down to a certain level, no matter who you are, when you're talking about food and sustenance and feeding yourself and looking at beautiful produce and looking at a beautiful meat counter. We all see that through our eyes in a similar way. For me, there's a simplicity to it that I like.
Yeah, but listen, I think I think there's a healthy dose of, you have to have a healthy dose of confidence and ego to be able to put yourself out there as an entrepreneur. I think that's just the truth.
Sure.
You also have to have an underlying insecurity that kind of drives you to do the things you do and to change, because there's a fear of failure. I think that always kind of, at least for me, I always think, okay, if I don't do this, I'm likely to fail. So I've got to change. Right. And part of this whole, when I listen to you and I think, the guy's written a couple books, he's had a number of television shows, he's had multiple restaurants, he's got now retail locations. I mean, you've had you've managed to take you as a brand. And I feel like I relate to this because you've taken yourself and you've created a business and a number of businesses around it, but it does come back to you in some way, Mark. So how do you like, what's keeping you up? Like, you must have had moments where you thought, what the hell am I doing here? Like, this is a lot to take on. Or do you just love having lots to do and you thrive on that?
Well, I guess I enjoy the challenge. There's no question about it. And it seems like a very natural thing to be doing to me. It's not, I'm not afraid of the challenge. And I know that it's funny when you embark on a new project, I always say to myself, I wish I knew now what I'm going to know in 9 months. And it's the mystery of life. It's the mystery of every opening you do. There's always mistakes. There's always things you wish you had thought through more. But that's part of the game. I really enjoy thinking up a concept and then seeing it through the design stage and then see it through the opening stage. And then you sit back and you look at it and it's like a living organism. But I find there's something very satisfying to that.
But you owned North 44 for like 28 years. And then your lease was up and you said, I'm done. Like that takes a lot of courage. Like what made you go, okay, I'm moving on from that. Don't need to do that.
Well, it was all very practical actually, because the building was actually, we were operational 29 years and the whole building had to be rebuilt. The roof, the mechanical, the ventilation, the wiring, the plumbing. In essence, you had to tear the restaurant out completely and start over again. And we couldn't own the building. It wasn't possible. And it would have been about a $4 million rebuild. And I didn't have the stomach to do that there again. It was a very practical decision. It was sad to say goodbye to the restaurant, but I made the right call. And it's interesting when you're faced with those decisions. It made no sense for me to slap a coat of paint on it and keep it going, because it needed to change, it needed to evolve, and to do that, you had to do it the right way, and you had to write a big check to do it. So, just didn't make sense. It makes sense, unfortunately.
But that's interesting to me because you are very practical about that. Like most people, if they've been in business for 29 years and a specific, I mean, you were doing many other things at the time as well, but that would have been kind of the thing that I think you would have had the most emotional connection to, because it had been such an integral part of your success story, right? So to be practical about that, is that advice that you would give people, that at some point in business you need to be more practical than emotional about the choices you're making? Or
well, you should try to almost never be emotional, other than with your enthusiasm, right? But if my wife had her druthers, we would have closed the restaurant a couple of years earlier. And I didn't have the heart to do it. But then when I was faced with signing a new lease, that's when I pulled the plug and made the decision. But she had gotten over the emotion of it earlier than I did, to let it go. So she's very practical minded. You could say even more so than me.
Huh.
So that's a good wall to have to bounce things off. So you have to move on. There's a time for everything, and there's a time to be smart about it and to move on to the next thing. And I think we made the right call there.
Is that your practical, like when go back to the word practical, is that, how many young chefs out there are going to listen to this, or, younger restaurateurs who are thinking about what they want to build, and what would you tell them right now? Like, what's the advice that you'd give them to think about how they need to think about not just now, but the next 10 years of their career?
Well, it's hard to say, I would probably give them very practical advice, but I never listened to practical advice when I was young. So I was pretty bold about everything, and I took a lot of risk on early on, and I sort of bet the farm, which, a lot of people would never do that. But I did do that. And we had our challenges, and I saw my way through it. Now, would I tell someone to go bet the farm? I don't know. It would all depend on who they are.
Yeah. So
I think you have to be a real trench fighter to see your way through it. And you have to realize that not every day is going to be a good day, and you're going to have your challenges, and you're going to wonder why you did it sometimes. But at the end of the day, everything in life is challenging, and you can't be afraid of a challenge. You just have to try to be smart about it. And if you made a mistake, learn from it, change, evolve, do something different. Sit everybody down, shake the tree, try to figure it out. Don't be headstrong if it's not necessarily working. You have to find other ways to make it work. There's no science to it. A lot of it is just intuition and reading the business every single day, reading your clients every single day. But the world is full of competition, so you have to be good at it. You have to be sharp. And customers today are very smart. They're very, very smart.
That's true. I mean, you have also a very, you had some of your staff that have been working with you from like almost the beginning, if not the beginning. Have you not? Like you have like a team that
I have one employee that is 34 years. Wow. And I have others that are 25 and many that are 20, many that are 15 and 10. And so longstanding employees. And I think one of our successes has been that we tend to we retain really good people, and problematic people don't like to stay with us because they don't fit in, right? Yeah. So we really have a certain type of mentality that works with us, and they're very solid about their work ethic, and they're not people that you have to police a lot. Where our industry is full of people with very, very short attention spans. So they're all enthused. They want to come in, work in your kitchen. They work for 6 weeks. You train them for 6 weeks, and then they say, "Oh, you know what? I've decided I'm going to go to Europe and do a stage for 2 weeks." After you've spent 6 weeks training them to be somewhat productive, they came in and learned all these little tricks from you, and then off they go. So I have a very short appetite for people like that in the business. I'm a firm believer if you're a young cook and that's the trade you've chosen, find someone like a Keith Froggatt at Scaramouche. Go there and work for 3 years. Work for Anthony Walsh at Canoe. Stay there for 3 years. And you're gonna come out, you're gonna be a much better young chef than if you had bounced around and done all these things that seem really cool because they're on Instagram and social media. And, that is not the industry. That is not the industry at all. That's exactly the wrong way to learn the industry. So a lot of young people today suffer from that.
And do you pride yourself on your ability to recognize quickly talented people? Like, isn't that part of what your job is to try and identify, the skill set that you require to help the businesses do well?
Well, very much so, but it's not just me. So I let all my executive chefs do the hiring in each of their restaurants. And because it all started in one place, everybody has the same mentality. And it's like having 10 filters. So I'll always check with my managers, my chefs, as to how the employees are doing, how are they coming along, what was the hiring schedule like this spring for the patio season. And we tend to retain good people, find good people, because my managers were trained that way. My chefs were trained that way. And then they have me observing over top of them. So as a team, we tend to manage that pool of people, which is about 470 people. It's sizable now.
Yeah, that is sizable. That's a lot of people.
We laid off 400 people.
Yeah, that's hard, eh?
That was a sad day. So I'm driving up the Bayview Extension after just had the final meetings on everything. We closed down 7 operations, laid off 400 people. And I'm driving my car thinking about it. And I look in my rearview mirror and there's a cop. pulls me over, gives me a speeding ticket on the Bayview Extension for doing 68 and a 50. And I looked at, I didn't say anything to him.
Yeah.
I let him write the ticket, and he gave it to me. I said, you know what? I just want to say something to you. I said, I just shut 7 businesses down, laid off 400 people, and you're giving me this cheap ticket. I said, thank you very much. He went kind of ashen in his face.
Yeah, well, I mean, doesn't that, you never know what people are going through, right? Or what, what's happening. I mean, you never really know. Somebody told me that the other day. We were talking about somebody who was being really cranky, and we found out later that they'd gone through some real hardship. And I said, you just don't know what's going on with people. That must have been a really difficult day. But hey, on a brighter note, like a couple things. You grew up on bologna sandwiches, is that right?
Very good bologna sandwiches, yeah. Fried bologna sandwiches.
Fried bologna.
My mother's family grew up in Mount Pleasant, Ontario, so they owned the Lucky Dollar store, which was the grocery store, the butcher shop, and the post office. So it was like the center of town, and we would go to her place for the weekend, and they had the big tubes of Snyder's bologna hanging in the cooler. We would take a big chunk of it, and you would score it at a 45-degree angle on the top, and you would roast it in the oven like a prime rib, and then serve it with baked beans and fresh bread. And as kids, we just thought that was the greatest thing.
It sounds good, actually. Now I'm thinking, and mustard on it, I assume, right? Would it have mustard on it?
Well, on a fried bologna sandwich, we used a mustard called Nancy's mustard, which was a sweet Dijon mustard. Mm-hmm. I've never seen it in Toronto. It's a U.S. brand, predominantly in Buffalo. But that on toast with fried bologna, my mother used to make them for us all the time as kids. So life was simpler then, but just as tasty. It was always good food memories in my family. My mom was a very good cook.
That helps a lot. But you also, just hold on a second, because everyone's going to think you only ever eat good food. You like junk food too. What do you, when you fly, I hear you eat peanut M&Ms. Is that true?
I do.
and a little bit of a weak spot for chips?
Yeah, I'm a big salt and vinegar, like a Miss Vicky's. I think that's the best brand, and I do like a bowl of salt and vinegar chips while I'm watching a movie. So, yeah, I don't eat a lot of junk food, but I can be a bit of a sweetie head when like a chocolate covered almond really doesn't survive very long.
That's hilarious. It makes me feel you're actually validating me right now. I'm feeling okay. It's all right if Mark McEwan is eating M&Ms and salt and vinegar chips, and I'm okay. I can.
Yeah, like not every day. You pick your moments, and on the very rare occasion, tell me that a McDonald's hamburger still doesn't taste good. Like I grew up as a kid on that type of food. I remember the first McDonald's opening in Buffalo, New York. They still have it. It has the golden arches, that old design. Yeah. It still exists on Sheridan Drive in Buffalo.
Oh, geez.
So I remember how exciting it was as a kid to go there, and for 50 cents you'd have a drink and a French fry and a burger. That was sort of the beginning of fast food, right?
Yeah. What's the weirdest thing you've ever eaten?
Oh, I know a lot of weird things when I was in China. I was in China for a couple of weeks, 10 years ago or 15 years ago now, a long time. I ate eyeballs and duck tongues, and I was happy to leave and have a slice of pizza in the airport.
Because it was more normal.
And you've tried insects. People eat insects, and I've tried all the insects you can eat and larvae and all those things. And I guess if you have to, why not? But if I don't have to, I'm not eating it.
You're not eating.
I have virtually no interest in it.
Who's your favorite cook?
In terms of chefs?
Yeah.
I'm a big Thomas Keller fan because I just like the way he runs his businesses. I'm a big Daniel Boulud fan. I think there again, you have a chef that is a very, very talented chef, a very nice man, and a very good businessman. So I admire people like that in the industry. I have lots of chef friends in the city. And Anthony Walsh, I was talking to him earlier today on the phone, and I think he's an incredibly competent, hardworking chef. I mentioned Keith Froggatt at Scaramouche. He's still there behind the stoves doing it every day. So on a local level. And then there's just so many young chefs, and so many have gone through my kitchens and gone on to do really well, like Rob Gentili, and Susa Lee is a good buddy of mine. I go back with all of them. There's very few that I haven't met, so
That's
feel
cool.
fortunate, and some days I feel old when I think about that.
Yeah, it's true, right? Who cooks at home? You or your wife? Who cooks at home?
Roxanne's a very good cook, but I tend to do most of the cooking because I can do it very quickly. So we don't. She's a little more methodical and a little more recipe driven, so it takes her longer. But she cooks mean Italian, like really, really good Italian food.
You'd be a tough audience. Like, good for Roxanne, because you'd be a tough audience, I think, to cook for. I think I would be intimidated by.
Arlene, I'm a very easy audience.
Are you?
You could make me a BLT sandwich and I'd be happy.
Okay.
I like eating other people's food. It's nice to not have to cook, right? But I did a roast chicken last night. I salt and peppered the cavity, and I put thyme and rosemary and lemon and garlic. And then I roasted shallots in the fat from the chicken. Halfway through, when the chicken was done, I put the shallots and the garlic in and roasted that. And I did roasted beets with lots of sea salt and olive oil, and I just foil wrapped them, baked them in the oven, and skinned them, and then slit them and grated a little bit of feta cheese on them. And that dinner was so delicious. Fresh applesauce.
Oh,
Just so delicious.
I'm going to be right over. That sounds delicious. But so do you have a workout regime that, like, how do you counter all the great food? I mean, you eat healthy, but there's a lot of caloric intake. When just listening to that, I thought, oh my God, that would be my whole meal.
Funny enough, we don't overeat at all. My wife and I are very good about that. We both exercise a lot. She exercises like 5 days a week. I try to do 4. I work with a trainer, and one day I do a class with Roxanne, and you just have to work at it, but you just can't overconsume, and you can't drink every night of the week, and you can't eat chocolate covered almonds every day, right? So you pick your poisons, and typically we eat 2 meals a day, not 3.
Yeah.
Well, we usually skip a meal, eat a little tiny snack or something. And I find we don't have any problem with keeping the weight right. But overconsumption is the big thing. Just people eat too much.
It's true.
I see it all the time. And obesity is a huge problem in society now. Huge problem. I think 60% of the population is overweight. And in the U.S., it's even more dramatic than that. So from there, it just complicates the health system. It complicates all sorts of things. But that's another whole conversation. But,
it is. But on that topic, I mean, Mark, I do have to say you've really figured out how to give back. I mean, you've been an ambassador for Second Harvest in Toronto. You spend a lot of time talking about food rescue and hunger relief, and I know you've partnered with Sunnybrook Foundation. You sit on the board of your alma mater with George Brown Foundation. I mean, you really do give back, and you are concerned about exactly what we're talking about, which is good, healthy eating and putting food on the plates of everybody, and not in excess, but just as a food security issue, making sure people can eat. What drives that for you? What's the motivation?
Well, it's hard to believe that there's many people in the city that really worry about where the next meal is coming from. I never have been that person to have to think that way, but it's sad that you have moms that can't feed children, and you have elderly people that don't have proper diets. You have homeless people that have no diet at all except what they can find at the shelters. So there's a huge need for that. So we started with Second Harvest 30 years ago. So that, Bonnie Stern called me up. That was the inaugural year of that. And we've been on board for every year since. And I've been an ambassador for that, and I work with them on all different fronts. So, we've been feeding frontline staff while the shutdown's happening in the city with the EMS and supplying a lot of shelters with food and supplying people who supply shelters with food, giving food through the grocery store. So I think you have an obligation to be a part of the community.
Yeah, it's good. It's good advice, and maybe we can leave the conversation there, because I feel like, when I think about, and again, a very storied career. I mean, you've done so much. You're so accomplished. The restaurants, the cookbooks, the shows, the community and charitable support. I mean, the reinvention of yourself and now the grocery, the retail stores that you have. I think you really define to me what reinvention is about, which is this notion of constantly trying to evolve yourself. It's not always a left sharp turn or a 180. It's often just an evolution of what you're doing and finding ways to expand yourself into different directions. And I love that about your whole story. I mean, it's fascinating to me. And I'm really appreciative of the giving you do. And thank you for sharing so much of your knowledge and wisdom today. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you.
Oh, it's a lot of fun, Arlene. I appreciate the time with you. And now we have to kind of reinvent ourselves again and look to this reopening of the city and what that's going to mean and where we'll be a year from now. So that's going to be a very interesting year for all of us in Toronto, that's for sure.
Yeah, well, I'm sure many of us will look to you to see what you're doing because of the leadership you've demonstrated in the past. So as you come out of this and as you help reopen everything, I wish you nothing but success with everything. So thanks, Mark. And I'll see you at Thornbury.
I hope so. Very soon.
Very soon. All right.
You take care.
You too. Bye-bye.
I have to tell you that I love the fact that Mark McEwan likes junk food too. I mean, during COVID, there have been times that I have questioned my eating decisions and I have been feeling a bit guilty. So that made me feel good. But all that aside, listen, Mark has been through everything, through recessions, through growth, having to sell his fiancé's engagement ring to survive, having to restructure things, and now through COVID, having to reimagine what the restaurant business is going to be into the future. I really admire his ability to think about the long-term game. And when you're reinventing yourself, that is so critical. You have to think to the future. You have to not be so emotional that you can't also be practical. And it's a fine balance. Good luck with your own reinvention. Stay safe and stay human. Thanks everyone for tuning in. This podcast is made possible by the great folks at Venture Communications. Thanks to our engineers, writers, producers, and all the folks who work really hard to bring you these great stories of reinventions each and every week.